Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is once again punching left after being criticized for backing Republicans. Now, in an interview with the New York Times, columnist Maureen Dowd published on Saturday, Pelosi defended herself against criticism that she too often caves to Republicans and Donald Trump when it comes to legislation. Now, Pelosi's comments followed a quote from a spokesperson for Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, in a Washington op-ed. Now, you're going to love this quote. They said that, quote, "the greatest threat to mankind is the cowardice of the Democratic Party." Oh, damn. So let me give you some context into where that came from. Now, Pelosi, of course, had pushed to pass a Senate Republican bill that increased funding to deal with conditions at the U.S. border. Oh, now what's wrong with that? Well, it turns out that bill had no accountability. There was no humanitarian guarantees for detained immigrants, particularly children. So basically, she handed Donald Trump and the Republicans a blank check and said, well, you know, we will trust that you will do the right thing. Now, I talked about that last week. Mitch McConnell, basically, she caved to Mitch McConnell, and most importantly, the other centrist Democrats who didn't want to look weak on the border. So it was a bit of an internal insurrection where you had a lot of these centrist, so-called moderate, but actually they're more Republicans than anything, Democrats that decided to go, no, we're not going to go with the Senate. We're not going to go with our House bill, which actually has these protections built in, and that we had personally had a conversation with Mike Pence, who agreed to include some of these protection provisions. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to go with Mitch McConnell. We're going to give away all of our leverage to Mitch McConnell, the Grim Reaper, and let him basically have his way. And that's what Pelosi had pushed for. So, now after she was called out for this, here's what she told Maureen Dowd, quote, "All these people have their public whatever and their Twitter world, but they didn't have any following. They're 4 people, and that's how many votes they got." Dripping with condescension towards progressives, towards the Justice Democrats. It's not just AOC. It's, of course, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. And look, these are the people that have been pushing the conversation to the left. It's incredibly important. And look, let's be honest. That bill got dozens of votes from Democrats. But it wasn't enough to overcome the Republicans that the centrist Democrats had teamed up with. You know, Democrats have a majority in the House, right? But yet, they ended up pushing a Republican bill. How is it that the House under Democratic leadership pushes Republican legislation? I mean, that's what they're doing. Oh, right, it's because of Nancy Pelosi and the other centrists. Now, AOC shot back on Twitter, and this is great. She said, "The public whatever is called public sentiment. Wielding the power to shift is how we actually achieve meaningful change in this country." She also added and explained her no vote on that piece of legislation that, quote, "I don't believe it was a good idea for Democrats to blindly trust the Trump administration when so many kids have died in their custody. It's a huge mistake. This administration also refuses to hand over documents to Congress on the whereabouts of families. We still have families that were separated from their children that they have not been reunited, despite court orders mandating that they should have been reunited by now. And I believe it was, 10, 11 children now that have died in Border Patrol custody? These are people that don't care about the people that they're supposed to protect and care for. Remember, these people aren't criminals. They're seeking asylum, which is legal. That is perfectly legal to do. In fact, you have to be in the United States to claim asylum. Instead, because of Donald Trump and his zero-tolerance policy, we have basically thrown them into prison-like conditions. But in reality, Border Patrol and Health and Human Services are supposed to protect them and care for them. But, as we found out, at least half of the roughly 20,000 U.S. border agents that are employed by the government might be racist. And we found that out due to internal Facebook groups where current and former Border Patrol agents came to do conversation with each other. And they'd post racist memes and stories about AOC pictures, about, our congresswomen and the migrants, some memes saying, let them die. I mean, just some horrible, horrible racist stuff. Now, Matt Stoller had an excellent tweet about this situation, about the bill especially, saying, this is a bet by Pelosi that AOC is wrong and that the Trump administration will do the right thing on the border with the money Congress just appropriated. Not a bet I'd make, but okay. So this is the mindset that frustrates me the most. It's the Obama, Joe Biden, centrist Democrat way of thinking. No, you don't understand. The right wing, totally not monstrous. No. You just have to get them to do the right thing, and they'll do it. And the fever will eventually break, and they'll come around if you give them everything that they want. No, that's not how that works. This is the party that locks children in cages and then defends the practice without batting an eye. You think they're going to come around? No, they're not. They're beholden to their monstrous base. There are people, and I'm not saying all of them, there are Republicans, conservatives, that delight in the suffering of these migrants. For them, the cruelty is the point. Oh, you shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have fled violence and poverty and governmental corruption to come here to America. Because if you do, we're going to punish you, and then we're going to take joy in it. I mean, that's disgusting. Again, they're not a majority of this country, right? But for them and the Trump administration, the cruelty is the point. It was supposed to, and their explanation is, it's supposed to be a deterrent to deter people from coming here illegally. Again, not illegally if you're claiming asylum, and it actually hasn't worked as a deterrent. But again, the cruelty is the point. Now, they're not a majority of this country. They're obviously not all Republicans, thankfully. But there is a Republican Party out there that does represent those people. And let's be honest about that. Now, Pelosi, she did go on to blame Mitch McConnell for this, whom she described as, quote, authentically terrible. She's not wrong. She goes on to say, with all due respect, the press likes to make a story that is more about Democrats divided than the fact that Mitch McConnell doesn't care about the children. Now, look, Nancy, Democrats are divided. Again, you have the people like the Blue Dog Democrats, the so-called Problem Solvers Caucus, which is made up of both moderate Democrats and Republicans, the corporate, Democratic establishment, and all the other centrist Democrats. They don't represent the will of the people, right? Those are the ones who sided with Mitch McConnell. And they are against the progressives. And instead of fighting for the majority of Americans, who, by the way, agree that the asylum seekers should be here and should be allowed to, petition for asylum and not be thrown in cages, well, they ended up losing because you had more centrist Democrats and Nancy Pelosi who decided to give up. Now, either that is incredible weakness by the supposed master legislator of the Democratic Party, or she is on their side. Still, she said this, and I love this quote because of how absurd it is, right? If the left doesn't think I'm left enough, so be it. As I say to these people, come to my basement. No, I will not go in Nancy Pelosi's basement. I'm afraid I'd never make it out again. But no, she says, I have these signs about single payer from 30 years ago. Oh, so you were for single payer 30 years ago. Well, I know another person who was for single payer that long ago, except he doesn't have signs in his basement. He's holding signs. In fact, he's campaigning all over the country to be president of the United States so that he can enact that policy. But what is Nancy Pelosi doing? Well, she's keeping stuff in her basement. You know what? You know what happens? You know what you can use basements for? To store things that you've killed, to hide things that you've killed, like progressive legislation. My question is, if Nancy Pelosi is so progressive, then why are the signs in her basement and not in the forefront of this fight? Over 55% of Americans, and this is after all the attacks from centrist Democrats, mainstream media, and Fox News, right? 55% of the country wants a single-payer government insurance option. Not option, sorry, government insurance that is guaranteed. Why is it not the forefront? Oh, right, it's because you don't actually believe in fighting for single-payer, which is why those signs will continue to stay buried in her basement along with all the other progressive legislation that she has buried. I mean, whatever happened to introducing a living wage bill? Don't you guys remember that she's like, oh, as soon as we take the House, within 100 days, we will introduce legislation for a living wage, $15 an hour. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, right. She hasn't done that. She backed down because that's what she does. She's not a progressive. She's not a fighter. What we need to do is to replace Nancy Pelosi with someone who will fight. If we don't, we're going to continue to get the same old establishment nothing. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.